Hi, I'm Kat, and like usual, today I have a true crime case for you. I'll also be doing my makeup at the same time, and I also have a word in Romanian. So let's just quickly start with the word for today, which is cutie. 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 Well done, guys, you just said box. In 1957, John Stakoyak, a young muskrat hunter, went to check his traps, which were set near a park just north of Philadelphia. As he walked through, he found a small cardboard box lying on the ground. Inside this box, he found the naked body of a boy, wrapped in a flannel blanket. Because John's traps were illegal, scared that the police would punish him and take away the traps if he would tell them about the box, he just ignored it and carried on hunting. A few days later, Frank Guthrum, a college student, was driving down the road when he noticed a bunny running alongside the highway. Frank knew that there were traps in this area and he stopped to make sure that the bunny was safe. As he looked through the underbrush, searching for traps, he came across the same box. Even though he was also scared of the police, Frank reported the body to them after he heard of the disappearance of Mary Jane Barker, a 4-year-old girl who went missing in New Jersey. Given that the boy in the box was young, between 3 and 7 years old, police were hopeful that he would be quickly identified, but when they saw the body, they lost hope that this will happen. Naturally, people would be looking for a healthy, well cared for and loved missing boy. But they wouldn't be looking so much for a dirty, malnourished, thin, unhealthy looking boy. Sadly, the boy in the box was just that. His hair was matted and it seemed to have been recently cut, as clumps of his hair still stuck to his body. The boy was severely malnourished and his body was covered with surgical scars, particularly on his ankle, groin and chin. Even though he looked abandoned, police took his fingerprints hoping that they would find a match. Unfortunately, though, no one did. Over the next few years, over 400,000 flyers were sent out to the Philadelphia area as well as other towns in Pennsylvania. A forensic facial reconstruction was done and a drawing of a happy young boy was included on all of the posters. Flyers were posted in police stations, post offices, included in the envelopes with gas bills, but no one came forward with any information as to who this boy might be. The crime scene where he was found was searched over and over again by 270 police academy recruits who actually, very importantly, made a discovery. They found a man's blue corduroy cap, a child's scarf, and a man's white handkerchief with a letter G in the corner. But with all of these clues, the investigation just led nowhere. The police also distributed a post-mortem photo of the boy, fully dressed and in a seated position as he may have looked in life, in the hopes that it might lead to a clue. But there were absolutely no leads. Up until recently, the boy's identity remained as much a mystery as it was in 1957. Even though the case ran cold, the publicity and interest in the case highlighted a few theories throughout the years. In 1960, an employee of the medical examiner's office was told by a psychic that the boy in the box came from a local foster home. The police inquired about the boy at the foster home and they actually found blankets similar to the one that he had been wrapped in hanging on the clothesline, as well as a bassinet that was sold in the same box that he had been found in. The employee theorized that the boy was born to the daughter of the man who ran the foster home, and his death was accidental. Despite the employees' insistence of these facts, no connection was ever made between the boy in the box and the foster home. It wasn't until over 40 years later that another shocking theory emerged. A woman referred to only as M came forward, claiming that the boy was purchased by her abusive mother and abused for several years in her home. M claimed that after the boy vomited up his dinner of baked beans, her mother bashed his head against the wall as punishment. Then she attempted to bathe him, during which the boy sadly died. The police initially followed this lead as there were remains of baked beans in the boy's stomach and his fingers appeared to be water wrinkled. Those were both pieces of information that were never shared with the public. They were also encouraged by M's description of the boy as a small child with long hair. This fit with their theory that his hair had been recently chopped, as well as an old testimony from a man who claimed to have seen the boy being placed in the box near the woods. Unfortunately, though, police eventually let the theory go as they were unable to verify M's claims. After looking into M's background, they found a history of severe mental illness. When they tried to corroborate her claims with neighbors and friends, all of them denied ever seeing a child in the home. The theory was eventually dismissed as ridiculous. Forensic artist Frank Bender developed a theory that the victim may have been raised as a girl. The child's unprofessional haircut, which seemed to have been performed in a hurry, was the basis for the theory, as well as the appearance of the eyebrows having been styled. In 2008, Frank released a sketch of the unidentified child with long hair reflecting the strands found on the body. In 2016, two writers, one from Los Angeles, California, Jim Hoffman, and the other one from New Jersey, Luis Romano, explained that they believed they discovered a potential identity from Memphis, Tennessee, and they requested the DNA to be compared between the family members and the child. The lead was originally discovered by a Philadelphia man who introduced Romano and Hoffman to each other and was developed and presented with the help of Hoffman to the Philadelphia Police Department and the Vidocq Society in early 2013. In December 2013, Romano became aware of the lead and agreed to help the man from Philadelphia and Hoffman to obtain the DNA from this particular family member in January 2014, which was sent quickly to the Philadelphia Police Department. Local authorities confirmed they would investigate the lead, but said they would need to do more research on the circumstances surrounding the link to Memphis before comparing DNA. In December 2017, Homicide Sergeant Bob Kallmeyer confirmed that DNA taken from the Memphis man was compared to the Fox Chase boy and there was no connection. Several other theories have been presented over the years, but all of them eventually were discounted. It seemed that the mystery of the boy in the box might never be solved and that America's unknown child could remain that way forever. The boy in the box was originally buried in a potter's field. In 1998, his body was exhumed for the purpose of DNA extraction, which was obtained from enamel on a tooth. He was reburied at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia, which donated a large plot. The coffin, headstone, and funeral service were donated by the son of the man who buried the boy in 1957. There was significant public attendance and media coverage at the reburial. The grave had a large headstone bearing the words "America's Unknown Child." City residents kept the grave decorated with flowers and stuffed animals.
A memorial service was held today for a little boy who's become known as America's Unknown Child. The boy in the box was found dead 61 years ago in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood. Eyewitness News reporter Howard Monroe has more from Ivy Hill Cemetery, where a local group is not giving up hope on figuring out who the boy is.
I would say the sadness, the tragedy.
The reasons why the Vidoc Society says America's unknown child stays in the forefront of people's minds.
Why did this child have to die? It's a horrible thing.
The child was found in a box back in 1957 off of Susquehanna Road in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood. He became known as the boy in the box. Police estimate he was between 4 and 6 years old. No one has been arrested, and his death is the Philadelphia Police Department's longest open cold case. After an initial investigation, he was buried in a city cemetery, and then in 1998, his body was exhumed to test for DNA. He was reburied here at Ivy Hill Cemetery in a donated plot on November 11, 1998.
When I come here, I can feel his spirit, and he knows he's loved and he's missed, and we're going to put a name on that stone.
And now, 61 years later, they say they are closer than they've ever been to figuring out who this little boy is.
There has been, within the last 6 months, extraordinary progress from sources all over the world.
The Vidoc Society hosts a memorial service every year for the boy. They are a group of independent investigators. They say advances in DNA technology is helping them in their quest to find out what happened to the boy. They say if nothing else, his death was not in vain.
Since 1957, child molestation, child abuse has become much more to the forefront of America's conscience than it was prior to that date.
Howard Monroe, CBS 3 Eyewitness News.
For 65 years, the identity of Philadelphia's boy in the box remained a mystery. Until a breakthrough in October 2021 finally revealed the boy's name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But it was 14 months before the victim in one of America's most notorious cold case homicides was made public in December 2022. In that time, loads of experts, police and city officials who helped solve the mystery had to undertake the tedious work to confirm the boy's identity. They also faced huge pressure and abuse from online trolls, even their own colleagues and the public, because the word spread that there was a breakthrough. They had to fight off endless speculation and conspiracies, so much so that they even had to use decoy stories to keep their secret. And I might say there was tons of speculation. Books were written about this case, online forums and websites dedicated to theories around the murder, and thousands of media articles around America, and not only were filled with stories about America's unknown child. Joseph's identity was finally uncovered using groundbreaking DNA research and genealogy to build a web of relatives that eventually led to the boy. The final piece in the puzzle came after experts discovered his parents, Augustus John, nicknamed Gus Zarelli, and Mary Elizabeth Abel, nicknamed Betsy. Gus died in 1991 and Betsy died in 2014. Initially, their names were kept secret by the team out of respect for their surviving relatives, but they were eventually revealed in January after research by journalists and online detectives who, for years, have been absorbed by the case, found out their names. In an interview with dailymail.com, the leader of the team which undertook the DNA analysis and genealogy work, Dr. Khalil Fitzpatrick, talked about the exhaustive work that resulted in the identity of the boy in the box. Joseph's naked, badly bruised body was found wrapped in a blanket in a JCPenney bassinet box in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood on 25th of February 1957. A national appeal was launched to identify the boy and to capture his killer. Pictures of his likeness were printed by the Philadelphia Inquirer and distributed to hundreds of thousands of homes in the city. Police also took the unusual step to publishing a post-mortem photo of the boy's battered face and another of his body dressed in children's clothing looking for help from the public. Pictures were also put up across stores in Philadelphia, and the people today who were alive in 1957 still remembered those haunting images. The appeals brought thousands of tips in, some of them even from overseas, but none of these tips led to finding the boy's identity. Police believe that he was killed by blunt force trauma, and many theories emerged as to who killed him and why. Captain Jason Smith, head of Philadelphia PD's homicide department, told the press conference which disclosed Joseph's identity, quote, "We have our suspicions as to who may be responsible, but it would be irresponsible of me to share these suspicions as this remains an active and ongoing criminal investigation." Now let's talk a bit about the biological parents of the boy in the box. Betsy, the mother, she was 21 years old when Joseph was born, and a close relative said that he could have been put up for adoption. The relative said that there was no cruelty, and there is also no suggestion that Joseph's parents had anything to do with his death. The relative said, quote, "Betsy, no way in the world. There was no cruelty, no meanness or cruelty that swelled within her heart and soul." End of quote. Joseph's parents actually never married. Family members believe that the boy was put up for adoption through a Catholic organization shortly after his birth. Speaking to the Inquirer, a relative of Betsy described her as a real beauty. Their son Joseph was conceived in the spring of 1952. He was born on January 13 when his mother was 21 years old. The relative who spoke with the Inquirer suggested that Betsy put up her son for adoption as she did it before with a previous child she gave birth to, a daughter. Betsy was a graduate of Muriel Dobbins Career and Technical Education High School in North Philadelphia in 1949, and a year later she had a daughter that she put up for adoption. She went on to marry her manager at the movie theater where she worked, Joseph Plunkett. They had 4 children together. She passed away in 1991 after a battle with lung cancer caused by asbestos exposure. She was survived by her children, grandchildren, as well as 4 sisters and 1 brother. According to the same newspaper, Gus was the son of Italian immigrants who grew up in West Philadelphia. He was a construction magnate who passed away at the age of 87. His construction business was prominent through Chester County, and when he died in 2014, his obituary paid tribute to his strength and character. He was survived by his wife of 55 years who passed away in 2018, as well as 4 children and 9 grandchildren. It's unclear if he ever knew about his son Joseph. A 1998 wedding notice for Gus's son, also named Augustus, says that he was a graduate of Drexel and Penn State University. He also worked in construction. An attorney for Gus's 4 children told the Philadelphia Inquirer that they only learned about their connection to the case recently, and they were never shown anything that would link their father or any member of their family to this. The attorney said the family were sympathetic and horrified, adding, quote, "There has been no credible allegation by anyone, including the Philadelphia Police Department, that their father knew of the birth of this child or had anything to do with the life of this child, and certainly nothing even remotely suggesting that he knew of or had anything to do with any harm having come to this child." End of quote. His family said that they had been attacked in every possible social media outlet, suggesting the most awful of things, all of which are baseless. Neither family could shed any light on how Gus and Betsy met or what the exact nature of their relationship was. But Betsy's relatives said that it was possible Betsy lived in West Philadelphia, where Gus lived for a period in 1950s. The DNA developments in this case came more than half a century after the boy's death. Dr. Fitzpatrick, the founder and CEO of Identifinders International, first became aware of the case in 2010 through newspaper headlines and conversations in cold cases circles, but even then DNA technology was relatively primitive. Within a few years, knowledge in the field was advanced enough to help children who were adopted to find their birth parents by combining DNA technology with genealogy. Forensic genealogists like Dr. Fitzpatrick started to ask how come we can't apply this to cold cases. So after success in other high-profile cases, Identifinders International was officially brought onto the boy in the box case in February 2019. The previous team who tried to use the boy's DNA were working with badly damaged samples taken from teeth obtained when Joseph's body was first exhumed in 1998. In April 2019, a second exhumation took place and a part of the femur was removed for analysis. The sample was sent by Identifinders International to the International Commission on Missing Persons at The Hague, Netherlands, who were able to extract 3 DNA samples, each just 1/8 of a nanogram. Dr. Fitzpatrick's team tried whole genome sequencing on the results in the hope of generating a DNA profile of the boy, which could be run through genealogy databases, but sadly this process failed. The crucial DNA breakthrough came when her team were recommended a lab which handled ancient DNA, just like DNA taken from mummies. So in February 2021, that lab was able to extract a DNA sample large enough to create a profile for the boy. Dr. Fitzpatrick said, quote, "They did several extractions and one of them yielded 3 nanograms. You go from an 8 to 3 because of the magic they did. It was the right expertise, the right people, the right time. The lab that actually did the miracle for us wants to remain confidential. They did a miracle for us and they asked to remain anonymous for various reasons. It was more like a research project for them," end of quote. But even with the game-changing development, it was far from solved and the genealogy work began. Misty Gillis, a forensic genealogist from Identifinders International, led the work of comparing Joseph's DNA profile with millions of samples held in databases used by the organization. She has young children around the same age as Joseph was, so this is really personal for her, and she wants Joseph's story to be told and to also do him justice. By comparing Joseph's DNA with samples in those databases, investigators were able to find close and distant relatives. But the process wasn't exactly simple. Dr. Fitzpatrick explained, quote, "We didn't really have a lot of close matches. In other words, we didn't really have a brother or a sister or an aunt or uncle. The initial hits were distant cousins, several times removed. What you're actually doing is, if all those people are related to the boy, they have to be related to each other as well in some way. And it's like a big Sudoku puzzle where you take the tools and you move the people around and their various relationships until you get that self-consistent pattern. When you do, there is one part missing, and that's the person you're looking for," end of quote. Within a few months, Misty, the genealogist, built a web that was leading the team very close to Joseph's identity. On the maternal side, she used third and fourth cousins, where she was able to build their genetic trees and see where they married into. It took her around 2 months until she was able to identify the birth mother. Joseph was born out of wedlock, which was taboo at the time, and even though his father's name was on the birth certificate, he also needed to be verified by DNA research. So Misty's research led to Justin Thomas, who was a distant relative of Joseph's father. Justin, a middle-aged engineer from Philadelphia, had taken a DNA test in 2017 which was initially meant as a gift for his ex-girlfriend, but they separated before she could use it, so Justin did the test himself. His results were uploaded to a database used by Identifinders International, and Misty tracked him down. She told him that he might be a match in a cold case from Philadelphia. So Justin got Misty in touch with his mother, who agreed to take a test herself. The test revealed that she was likely a first cousin of Joseph Zarelli, and it eventually helped Misty confirm the identity of Joseph's father. The investigators completed the puzzle, but it would still be a few more months before the breakthrough could be shared publicly. A call was arranged between Misty, Dr. Fitzpatrick, Philadelphia PD detective Bob Hesser, and a member of the police department's Office of Forensic Science. They went through all of the information and they all agreed they had the right name. They had to go to the medical examiner to have them sign a death certificate, and this took a few more months because the medical examiner was not so familiar with genealogy, so they had to go through the process. They said that if they would release the name, people might ask if they consider this or consider that, so the team had to cover those questions before the release. Until the press conference in December 2022, only a few people knew the boy's identity. It took over 1 year to announce it. They even had to keep it a secret from their detective colleagues. As speculation grew that Joseph's name was found, there were a lot of inquiries from the followers of the case desperate for details. Dr. Fitzpatrick said, quote, "I would get emails from the community saying things like, hey, just tell me if he's Eastern European. My grandfather was Eastern European and I think he was my grandfather's brother." One lady had written a book about the boy and she had pictures of another child that looked just like him. She wrote me this long email about why she had it all figured out, and all I could say is, thank you for the information, and she was dead wrong. She wanted me to say, oh my God, you've solved it, end of quote. Nobody who contacted Dr. Fitzpatrick had any information that was correct. Social media groups dedicated to the case were also circulating rumors that investigators identified the boy. Finally, in a press conference on December the 8th, 2022, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw disclosed Joseph's name to the public. She was joined by current and former investigators, Dr. Fitzpatrick, and a member of the Viaduct Society, a Philadelphia-based organization that works on unsolved murder cases, including the boy in the box. Dr. Fitzpatrick added, quote, "When you have a child that young, this could only be solved with genealogy. He's got no paper trail, he's got no history, he's got no legal history. The only documentation in the world was his birth certificate. And how are you going to find that in the middle of the millions of birth certificates in the Philadelphia archives?" End of quote. Dr. Fitzpatrick also highlighted that her team didn't use consumer databases such as Ancestry or 23andMe. Their main tool was GED Match, which is used by law enforcement in the US and has contributed to solving cases including the Golden State Killer. At the same press conference, Philadelphia law enforcement stated that Joseph lived in the area of 61st and Market Streets. The head of the Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit, Captain Jason Smith, said, quote, "I don't know what the neighbors knew or didn't know. The child did live past the age of 4 years old, so there would have been somebody out there that would have seen this child, perhaps another family member that hasn't stepped forward, possibly a neighbor that remembers seeing that child and remembers whatever was occurring at that particular household." End of quote.
Oldest unsolved homicides. In February of 1957, the body of an unidentified child was discovered inside of a box in a wooded area near Susquehanna Road in Northeast Philadelphia. The boy appeared to be malnourished, and his body bore the signs of recent and past trauma. In his very short life, it was apparent that this child experienced horrors that no one should ever be subjected to. Despite repeated pleas for help from the public and immense public interest in the story, no one ever came forward to claim the child. Throughout the decades, countless police officers and detectives worked this case, as did DNA analysts, geneticists, and doctors. For 65 years, the story of who would come to be known as America's unknown child has haunted this community, the Philadelphia Police Department, our nation, and the world. When people think about the boy in the box, a profound sadness is felt, not just because a child was murdered, but because his entire identity and his rightful claim to own his existence was taken away. And despite not knowing his name for 65 years, this child's tragic story was always remembered by the community, the Philadelphia Police Department, and our partners. Sadly, many that worked on his case throughout the decades and put in countless hours of work into identifying him have passed on. But as you can see, his story was never forgotten. When law enforcement cannot prevent a crime from occurring, our mission is to make sure that we investigate all leads and gather evidence that will give victims a voice. The science and technology that was instrumental in the identification of this child, one of our oldest unsolved homicides, gives me hope that we can continue to identify unknown victims of crime and that no one will ever again have to wait this long for their name and the story of their life to be told. There are so many that I wish to thank, and it would be impossible to name them all. However, I'd like to personally recognize some of our partners that are here speaking today. From the Medical Examiner's Office, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Constance D'Angelo, thank you. From Identifinders International, genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, thank you. And representing the VDOC Society, Mr. William Fleischer, thank you. You'll hear more from these individuals shortly, but suffice it to say, without their tireless work on this case, today's announcement would not have been possible. Next, from PPD, I'd like to thank Director Michael Garvey, the head of our Forensic Sciences Bureau, as well as Mr. Ryan Gallagher, our Forensic Laboratory Manager, who will also be speaking today. And of course, our tireless homicide detectives, who always put everything that they have into seeking justice for victims. To our current lead detective on this case, Detective Bob Hesser, and his partner, recently retired Detective Gregory Santamala, who several years ago became the stewards of this investigation. Thank you. And lastly, I want to acknowledge, I'm skipping one, I'm sorry. I'd like to also recognize the most recent prior lead on this case, retired Sergeant Bob Kallmeyer, who in his retirement now shares his talents as a member of the VDOC Society. So thank you. And now lastly, I want to acknowledge and thank PPD detectives Tom Augustine and Greg Rodden. Throughout the 1990s, both of these detectives worked extensively on this case and were well known for their unending dedication in seeking justice for the victim. Unfortunately, Detective Rodden passed away in early 2020, and Detective Augustine passed away just 6 weeks ago. While we wish they were still here with us today, we know that their passion and dedication lives on with their colleagues. While I'm thankful for the relentless work of everyone involved in this case, this announcement only closes one chapter in this little boy's story while opening up a new one. This is still an active homicide investigation, and we still need the public's help in filling in this child's life story. I will now turn this over to Captain Jason Smith, our commanding officer of our homicide unit, who will provide details into the investigation. Without the hard work, dedication, and passion and the doggedness of the many, we would not be here today to give America's formerly unknown child, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, a voice. Captain.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide you with an overview of this investigation, I would like to echo the sentiments of the Commissioner by thanking all those individuals and entities who participated and really put their hearts into this investigation. On February 26, 1957, at 10:40 a.m., the remains of a white male, estimated to be 4 to 6 years of age, were located in a wooded area with dense underbrush along Susquehanna Road between Varee and Pine Roads in the city and county of Philadelphia. The child had been severely beaten. He was unclothed, had been wrapped in a multicolored blanket, and placed inside of a cardboard box. The child had brown hair that was crudely cut close to the scalp and blue eyes. Multiple bruises were visible on the child's body. An autopsy revealed that the child has sustained multiple abrasions, contusions, a subdural hemorrhage, and pleural effusions. The autopsy confirmed that the child was between 4 and 6 years of age. The child was subsequently buried in plot number 191 at a potter's field located at 12898 Dunks Ferry Road in the city of Philadelphia. The investigation was originally assigned to Detectives Powell and Repsch in 1957 and reassigned to Detective Carruthers in May of 1960. Hundreds of tips and leads were received both locally and nationally from around the country. These tips were diligently followed up on by investigators. None, however, would lead them to the positive identification of the child. On October 30th, 1998, a court order was obtained to have the child's remains exhumed. A post-mortem examination was performed, and the child was subsequently reinterred at Ivy Hill Cemetery, located in the Cedar Brook section of Philadelphia. Portions of the remains were retained for future testing. DNA testing was performed at that time, but yielded no new leads in the investigation. For over 6 decades, the case was continuously investigated by members of the homicide unit who worked in concert with the medical examiner's office, the Forensic Science Bureau, the VDOC Society, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and many other local, state, and federal agencies. This investigation had come to be referred to as the boy in the box, and the child who was the subject of this investigation was referred to as America's unknown child. Homicide investigators, along with members of the medical examiner's office, conducted a review and assessment of investigations involving unidentified victims to determine which of those may benefit from the application of modern forensic techniques. It was determined that the case of the unknown child, OME number 57-0863, would benefit from the application of such modern forensic techniques. The portion of the remains that were in the possession of the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office were determined to be insufficient in order to obtain the required DNA to apply these modern techniques. In homicide cases such as this, extreme difficulty lies in the fact that rarely can they be resolved and the offender ultimately brought to justice until the victim is first identified. With that in mind, on April 24th of 2019, an additional court order was obtained to have the child's remains exhumed once again. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Washburn examined the remains and was able to obtain the required amount of DNA to apply modern forensic techniques. The child was reinterred and portions of the remains were retained for future testing. Contemporary forensic applications and techniques, including genealogical DNA testing, and inquiries were made with the assistance of genetic genealogists. The results of the DNA testing were uploaded to DNA databases, and the results were interpreted by the genealogists involved in this investigation. Based on the interpretation of the results by the genealogists, detectives were able to locate and make contact with possible relatives of the child's family on the maternal side. Through further investigation and additional testing, the genealogists involved in this investigation were able to establish the identity of the birth mother of the unidentified child. A court order signed by a Court of Common Pleas judge to obtain the birth records, death records, and adoption records for all children born to the established birth mother between the years 1944 to 1956 from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, Bureau of Health Statistics and Registries, Division of Vital Records. There were 3 responsive results based on this order. 2 of the results were birth certificates for children born to the established birth mother during that time frame who were previously known to investigators, one of whom provided DNA and was matched previously by the genealogist. The 3rd result was a birth certificate for a male child born to the established birth mother in 1953, which could be consistent with the approximated age of the unidentified child. The birth father was listed on the birth certificate for the male child born in 1953. Based on research by detectives and the genealogists, a male was discovered who could possibly be the birth father of the unidentified child. Detectives were able to locate and make contact with possible relatives of the child's family on the paternal side. Through additional testing, the genealogists were able to establish the birth father of the unidentified child. A request was sent to the Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General to determine if a Social Security number had ever been issued in the name of the child. The response from the Social Security Administration was that there had not been. Homicide investigators Detective Bob Hesser and Detective Greg Santamala, as well as Forensics Laboratory Manager Ryan Gallagher, met with Dr. Albert Chu of the Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Chu was apprised of the aforementioned facts. Dr. Chu also consulted with the genetic genealogists involved in this investigation. Dr. Chu indicated that based on the facts presented and the conclusions of the genetic genealogists, the death certificate for the unknown child, OME number 57-0863, would be amended to reflect the child's birth name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Joseph's date of birth is January 13th, 1953.
In January 2023, NBC 10 Philadelphia reported that Joseph was born to a couple that lived at 64th and Callow Hill, although the channel stated it was unclear if he lived there long enough for people to even notice him. The identification of Joseph meant that he could at least be buried under a headstone that features his name. A dedication ceremony was held at Ivy Hill Cemetery on January 13, 2023, where he has been buried since 1998 under a gravestone that previously read America's Unknown Child.
65 long years of only being known as the boy in the box, Joseph Augustus Zarelli was honored today on what would have been his 70th birthday. Chief Investigative Reporter Joe Holden, who has broken several developments in this case, takes us through today's very emotional ceremony and the family members who attended.
The unveiling of 2 headstones with the name Joseph Augustus Zarelli closes one chapter of arguably Philadelphia's most notorious cold case.
We've grown up knowing about the boy.
Patty Braxton and Kimberly Augustine's father was a detective with the Philadelphia Police Department. Thomas Augustine kept this case in the spotlight for years.
It's just bittersweet, because my dad passed 6 weeks before they identified the boy, and this would mean the world to him.
It was devastating to us to find that, 6 weeks after he passed, he got a name, but we're grateful for that.
Joseph Zarelli's identity was revealed last month at a news conference. The boy lived his short life in the area of 63rd and Callow Hill Streets in West Philadelphia. His body was discovered in February 1957, discarded in a box in Fox Chase. He had been beaten and was malnourished. Investigators have since declined to say what they believe happened. Bill Fleischer of the Vidocq Society made a point to speak directly to surviving family members of Joseph Zarelli.
I want to thank the families, the surviving siblings and relatives of Joseph, who may not have known anything about this. who care and keep him in his prayers.
Some members of Joseph's family attended the service and spoke at length with reporters off camera, telling us they mourned for Joseph, but say they never knew anything about the investigation or even the case before last month's news conference. They told me they'll be persistent in keeping in contact with police so that perhaps they can someday have closure and know what happened. With the exception of last month's news conference, Philadelphia police have been tight-lipped on any new details surrounding the investigation. They do have theories about what happened to Joseph Augustus Zarelli. They're just not ready to talk about them publicly. At Ivy Hill Cemetery, I'm Joe Holden.
Joe, thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the murder investigation into his case remains open. Finally, who killed Joseph Zarelli? Through the 65-year history of the boy in the box case, like I said, several theories surfaced about the identity and the motive of the killer or killers. One of them is the woman known as Martha, or M, as I mentioned her previously. In 2002, a psychiatrist based in Ohio reported that one of their patients claimed that her parents bought Joseph from a human trafficking ring in Kensington, Philadelphia. She said that the boy was regularly abused and died after a beating at the hands of the parents. Martha, who claimed she watched her mother dump the boy at the spot where he was found, was able to disclose details about the case that were only known to detectives. Investigators found this theory highly convincing, but in the end, no conclusive evidence was found. However, the theory was never ruled out. Another theory is the foster home. In 1960, a worker in the city's medical examiner's office asked for help from a psychic who turned the attention towards a foster home about 1.5 miles from where the body was found. The worker, Remington Bristow, investigated the home and found a bassinet which matched the box in which the body was found. Police investigated the theory and interviewed the foster father, but they closed that line of inquiry. Finally, a carnival worker's son. Detectives investigated for a short time if the boy was the son of carnival workers Kenneth and Irene Dudley, who had 10 children. The family lived a nomadic life across the United States. Police took an interest in them after one of their children, 7-year-old Carol Ann, died from neglect and was left in Virginia woodland wrapped in a blanket. 7 of the Dudley's children starved to death and none received a proper burial. Police questioned the couple but ultimately ruled them out of the boy in the box case. And I think that you can still submit any information you might have in regards to Joseph's life or death. So I'm going to give you the details as follows. To submit a tip via telephone, you can dial or text 215-686-TIPS, TIPS 8477. If you'd like to submit a tip, including photo or video via email, you can send an email to tips@phillypolice.com. Please include as many details as you can if you are sending photos or videos, such as the physical address and names of any known persons. Please include your information if you would like a member of the Philadelphia Police Department to follow up with you directly. I would personally suggest, if you do send your tips via email, you should put in the subject line this case or the name of this case or the name of the victim. You can also submit a tip anonymously online at lypolice.com/forms/submit-a-tip/index.html. These will also be on your screen, and these will also be in the description under this video. Please do let me know which do you think is the most likely scenario of what happened to Joseph. I personally wouldn't really want to speculate on this because I feel like there is still not enough information for an opinion, but I sincerely hope they will be able to find Joseph's killer or killers. On another note, however, even though I am fascinated by genealogy and DNA techniques today, I am also extremely worried of all those websites where you basically share your DNA profile with. My main question is, how secure is your DNA being stored? Do you know who has access to it? I'm inclined to believe that, you know, the government will have access to it 100%. That's my belief. I mean, yes, it's fascinating that, you know, you can find long lost relatives, or you can find your ancestors, discover that you perhaps are 10% Italian or African, but where does it end? We all know that for all of the positive things science does, the negative things always follow. The balance is just not there. And by the way, if you didn't know, now a DNA profile can be copied and planted to frame someone. So, you know, we live in modern times, but also scary times, and I feel like they get scarier and scarier. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. And I'm looking forward to your comments on this. Thanks. Bye.